Greetings and welcome to today's segment of Front Page, where every weekday I summarize and find the most interesting parts of the day's headlines from 5 different newspapers from around the world. My quest is to weed out the facts as they are reported in each newspaper, and I'll do my best to find the most interesting stories out there. I'm Mourad Hammami. Let's get started here at home in Turkey. First up is the Daily Sabah. There we go, and here we go. And the first headline reads... we're talking about terror. The first headline is talking about counter-terrorism operation and how they target the bases in the PKK, or the PKK bases, in fact, in camps in North Iraq and Syria. Now, the Defense Ministry announced early yesterday that the Turkish military carried out airstrikes targeting the PKK terrorist groups, positions including training camps, shelters and ammunition sites in northern Iraq and parts of northern Syria. Now, we are going to be joined by a very special guest today, an analyst, political analyst based in Ankara. But before Dilara joins us, let's take a look at this report.
The Turkish military carried out airstrikes late Tuesday in northern Iraq and Syria against PKK positions. Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said the Turkish military destroyed PKK terrorist shelters, hideouts and caves in newly launched Operation Winter Eagle in northern Iraq.
Irak'ın kuzeyinde ve bir bölümüyle de Suriye'nin kuzeyindeki hedefler hassas bir şekilde planlandı ve başarılı bir şekilde de icra edildi faaliyetler. Bu çerçevede yaptığımız çalışmalarda her zaman olduğu gibi olabildiğince hassas bir şekilde hem planlamada hem icrada masum insanlara zarar vermemek için, çevreye zarar vermemek için gerekli her türlü de tedbiri de aldık ve bu tedbirleri alarak bu faaliyetlerimizi icra ettik. Teröristlere ait barınak, sığınak, mağara, tünel, depo, sözde onların, teröristlerin eğitim merkezleri dahil arkadaşlarım, sözde karargahları hedef alındı.
Akar also said many wanted terrorists, including senior figures, were neutralized in the operation. The Turkish Air Force launched the operation against the PKK and its Syrian offshoot YPG terrorists in northern Iraq and Syria in response to the security threat directed toward the people and security forces and ensure border security. Operation Winter Eagle is being carried out in the Sinjar, Iraq, and Derik and Mount Karachok in northern Syria, where the terrorist bases are located in. Minister of Defence said all fighter jets safely returned to their bases following the operation, adding that all operations will continue until the last terrorist is neutralised.
Right, you're back with me in Syria. Okay, now joining me now is my very special guest. She's going to be talking about this terrorism incident in northern Iraq. Her name is Dilara Aslan, political analyst. Dilara Aslan, thanks for joining me here on Front Page. Always a pleasure to see you. Now, let me ask you one question. Is this a war? Is this an incident that Turkey is able to win against the PKK and the YPG? I mean, this has been going on for far too long now.
Yes, Operation Winter Eagle, I think we should see this operation as part of a series of previous operations that Turkey has been conducting. Turkey had in the past few years also launched Claw Eagle and Claw Tiger operations in northern Iraq. And also we know that Turkey has launched 3 counterterrorism operations in northern Syria. So this new operation that was launched on Tuesday is it's having the scope of both northern Syria and northern Iraq. But the most important place here is that Turkey has, for the first time in a long period, struck the area of Sinjar, which is one of the main hearts of the PKK terrorist camps and also their training camps. And therefore, the operation is especially very important. But we should see this operation showing that the presence in northern Iraq is still continuing, and that neither the Iraqi central government nor the Kurdistan regional government in the north are unable to contain this threat on their own. these two governments had 2 years ago struck the Sinjar deal, in fact, to eradicate the presence of the PKK, which is also harming their local populations. But unfortunately, the Sinjar deal didn't have much effect, and both the regional governments had not the ability to eradicate these terrorist organizations. So I think that Turkey is helping, in fact, these two governments and the local people there, but it is also carrying out its rights to self-defense because, as you know, Turkey is suffering very frequently from terrorist attacks coming from across the border and targeting people within its borders. But unfortunately, we have seen reactions to the operation of Turkey by the international community and the international media, saying that Turkey is targeting refugee camps and civilians, which it was denied by the Turkish Defense Ministry, which is conducting the operation in a very sensitive manner. For example, today we woke up to news that the United States is similarly targeting terrorists in northwestern Syria, but we have not seen the same perception and the same reaction to the United States, which is coming from thousands of kilometers away just to carry out its interests. But we have seen, unfortunately, again, negative reportings about Turkey, which is just trying to contain terrorism and is a neighboring country to both Iraq and Syria.
I understand. Indeed, we need to focus on, everybody needs to get rid of this terror once and for all. Dilara Alsan in Ankara, thank you so much for joining me here on Front Page. Always a pleasure. Take care. Stay safe. There you go. Lots going on in Turkey. Like I said, the terrorism continues in the north part of Syria, and Turkey is there to eradicate it. OK, let's move on now. We have lots of newspapers to get through, 4 more, in fact. Daily Mail is up next. Let's take a look at the Daily Mail. The headline reads, energy bills to soar by £650. Now the heat is on Rishi. This is an important news. This is affecting everyone around the world. Energy bills are to soar to £650, which is a record price cap rise that will be revealed today, putting the heat on Rishi Sunak as the Chancellor is tipped to cut council tax to help struggling families. Rishi Sunak will today help families pay soaring power bills while warning he cannot fully insulate them against the cost of living crisis. Now, regulators will reveal this morning that the energy cap is to rise, as I said, around £650 and the household bill to nearly £2,000. At the same time, the Bank of England is set to raise interest rates for the second period running, meaning higher mortgage payments for many homeowners. Government sources said that Chancellor would this afternoon unveil a multi-billion-pound package to help soften the impact on struggling families. It is expected to involve a temporary rebate on all bills of around £200, together with additional help from low-income households that could be worth an extra £300. Now, we'll see if this is enough, but we'll need to wait and find out, and we'll keep you updated here. Right, let's move on now to our next newspaper. It is The Guardian, another British newspaper. Pressure on PM as more Tory MPs call for him to go. This is, of course, a top story. We've been hearing about it for weeks. The pressure still continues. It seems pressure that hasn't let up for poor Mr. Boris Johnson. A fresh wave of Conservative MPs have submitted letters of no confidence in Boris Johnson's breaking cover to criticise the Prime Minister as the fallout from Downing Street Party's scandal continued to imperial his premiership. Now, in a sign that Johnson's position is still under threat, despite Number 10's desperate attempts to move on the crisis, 3 more MPs publicly called on the Prime Minister to resign, describing their shock and anger at Johnson's conduct since the publication of the interim report. Several MPs loyal to Johnson said that they were convinced that there was now a renewed, coordinated effort to oust Johnson, giving the timing of the announcements. OK, let's take a look at this short report.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that he will get on with the job of governing after another of his Conservative lawmakers said they plan to submit a letter of no confidence in his leadership.
Mr. Speaker, it tells me that it is more vital than ever for the government of this country to get on with the job, deliver our COVID recovery plan, and that is what we are doing.
Johnson is facing calls to resign after weeks of a steady drip of reports alleging his aides and he himself had attended parties in his Downing Street office and residence at a time when millions of Britons were under COVID-19 lockdowns. Opposition leader Keir Starmer criticised the government for ignoring the surge in living costs and for adding more pressure on working people by raising tax.
Mr. Speaker, we know this Prime Minister has no respect for decency or honesty. I can take it when it's aimed at me, but I won't accept it when he gaslights the British public, writing absurd articles about cutting taxes at a time when he's squeezing working people to the pips.
Johnson will set out a plan to level up Britain, a slogan he adopted in the 2019 election as shorthand for tackling regional inequalities, particularly between former industrial areas and London and the South East.
Well, you're back again with me, okay, in the studio. Okay, now let's take a look at our next newspaper. Let's take a look at the Financial Times. What does the FT say? What do the pink pages say? They say Eurozone record 5.1 inflation piles pressure on the ECB to tighten its rules. Now, consumer prices in the Eurozone rose by a record 5.1% in January, piling more pressure on the European Central Bank to respond with tighter monetary policy. The new figure defied expectations of a fall in inflation, which economics polled by Reuters expected a rate of 4.4%. Steeper increases in the price of energy and food were only partly offset by a slower growth in prices of manufactured goods, which meant annual inflation rose from its previous Eurozone record of 5% in December. Now, the rising cost of living is likely to dominate the first ECB Governing Council meeting of the year on Thursday, even if most economics expect the bank to stick to its timetable of keeping interest rates unchanged while it steadily reduces asset purchases over the course of the year. However, higher than expected inflation has led to the US Federal Reserve and the Bank of England to shift to a more hawkish policy stance than the ECB. The Bank of England is expected to raise rates for a second consecutive time on Thursday, while the market is pricing in 5 rises by the Fed this year. Okay, let's move on to our last but not least newspaper today. Right out of the USA, we are looking at the New York Times, and the headline has gone with US won't bow to Russia over who can join NATO. White House orders 3,000 troops into Europe. This is a top story, of course, because the Russian-Ukraine continues, the pressure that continues now. President Biden is directing the Pentagon to deploy more than 3,000 American troops to bolster the defense of European allies in the first major movement of US forces in Russia's military standoff with Ukraine. Mr. Biden is sending roughly 2,000 troops from Fort Bragg to Poland and Germany this week and repositioning about 1,000 troops that are part of Germany-based infantry squadron in Romania. Now, or to Romania, should I say. Now, this is, of course, on NATO's eastern flank, closest to Russia. Now, in addition, the Pentagon expects to make other moves of forces inside Europe and has ordered several thousand more troops to be on standby to deploy beyond the 8,500 troops given similar orders last week. In all, the moves are intended to try to deter Russia from attacking Ukraine and avert war in Eastern Europe. Along with these moves, the Biden administration is trying to find a diplomatic solution, readying a barrage of economic sanctions should Russia attack, and authorizing the transfer of some weapons and other equipment to Ukraine. Now, there's no intelligence that indicates that Russian President Vladimir Putin could invade Eastern European countries like Romania or Poland, but as a NATO member, the US has a treaty obligation to provide collective defense to those countries and is using those deployments to send a signal to allies and Mr. Putin. Well, there you go. That is 5 newspapers from around the world. You've got all the best stories, all the most interesting stories I found for you. And that wraps up the top headlines for today. Be sure to tune in tomorrow at the same time when I'll be here giving you a synopsis of the front pages from around the world. I'm your host, Mourad Hammami.